Good morning, everyone. My name is Maurice Mtombeni. I'm the Dean at the Gordon Institute of Business Science. Today, I have the pleasure of inviting you into a very important conversation about leadership. But first, let me remind you to really join us by posting comments, questions, and whatever inspires you on the chat on this LinkedIn Live platform. I'm very grateful today to be joined by the author of a book titled Take Charge, the Irreverend Mr. Nyimpini Mabunda, someone I'm very happy to call a friend. Good morning, Nyimpini.
Good morning, Maurice, and thanks for having me.
I'm very, very happy. You know, to have read this book, it's given me an opportunity to get to know you better. It's a brave thing to do, to put yourself out there.
You know, Maurice, even today I get surprised by people who quote certain things from the book and say, I know this and that about you. And I go like, did I say that?
Yeah.
So indeed, I've put myself out there. But I think it's important that to be credible and to really give people stories they can relate to and see themselves in it, we have to tell it like it is. And that's why I took that autobiography style of storytelling and captured the lessons.
So talking about that autobiography style of storytelling, when you're telling a story, you have somebody in mind. So it's not like you are having a conversation in a vacuum. Surely you must have a vision of a person or persons, an archetype.
Yeah.
Who did you have in mind when you sat down, or what did you have in mind when you sat down and wrote this book?
You know, this is the story that I wish someone had told the younger version of me. So actually it was me maybe 20 years ago. So I think about the time when I started fresh from university as a graduate trainee. In 1996, I started my career with Procter & Gamble. This is the kind of story that I would have loved to have as I start my career. I think of the time when I was a first-time line manager, so maybe 3-5 years into my career. This is the story that I would have loved to have. And then other milestones, like when I went abroad, you know, so I got an opportunity to work internationally twice. There's a lot of nuggets in the book about how to handle cross-cultural, how to be comfortable being uncomfortable, and so on. So it's really through the journey, but mostly the archetype will be an early or middle career manager who's thinking about how do I really get to the top that I can possibly be. It's not all about being a CEO. It's about achieving your career dream in a corporate. But what has since happened, Maurice, because the book has been out for a couple of weeks now, I think about 6-8 weeks, is that there are many people who are coming back to me and say, this story is making a huge difference in my life. And they don't fit the archetype of the person that I had in mind. So for example, entrepreneurs,
Yeah.
they actually can relate to it. And yet I wrote it mostly from a corporate perspective. But secondly, people who are in between jobs or are unemployed and thinking about how do I get started in my career, they find a lot of inspiration, mostly because of my relatable upbringing and background. So it's quite broad.
So those that have been in other talks or in my classes know that one of my favorite quotes come from Utata Nelson Mandela, who says, may your decisions be informed by your hopes and not your fears.
Yeah.
And it sounds to me like your decisions have been informed a lot about your hopes. So help me to understand, what is the foundation of these hopes? Let's go a little bit deeper beyond the book, so to speak.
Yeah. Look, I think when I grew up in a rural area in the former Gazankulu, in a homeland. And I grew up in a retail business family. And when I say retail, I really mean struggling general dealer, selling milk, bread, a bit of meat, and whatever else the village needed. And we hoped for a better life out of the village, right? We hoped to go to better schools. We hoped to grow the business and let it be like a Pick and Pay one day, and let it be expand into multiple branches. And one of the things that inspired me was to see what my parents were able to achieve without much education and experience in business, being self-taught. And this is what inspired me to go into a business career, actually, because I said, I want to be more knowledgeable about business than they were. I want to go and learn from other people who have run bigger businesses, and hence a degree in business and going to work for some of the largest corporates in the world, because I want to bring that knowledge to come and help expand the family business. So for me, that's kind of what what inspired me, because we always saw people who were running bigger businesses who were doing better than us, and we said, but what does it take to get there? So it's a hope of progress. It's a hope of emancipation. It's a hope of making a difference. That's what's important.
So I'm going to digress a little bit
Yeah.
in the spirit of including voices that are historically excluded in conversations.
Yeah.
You mentioned a word, Gazankulu.
Yeah.
And I don't think we can miss this opportunity on this illustrious global platform not to code switch.
Yeah.
So ndzi ta kombela ku ri hi vulavula Xitsonga ku ri na vona Matsonga va ta swi vona ku ri xa vulavuliwa a LinkedIn.
Swi ta va tsakisa swinene.
Swi tsakisa vanhu vo tala.
So
So ni kombela mi ni hlamusela ku ri loko mi kula a role i vo mani ava mi pfuxelela ku ri na n'wina mi nghena a swa mitirhweni swa business.
Swi sungule kaya hikuva vatswari a va ri ka bindzu. So ni vona papa mina na mana mina va karhi va fambisa bindzu. Swi tsakisa, swi navetisa. Kambe handle ka swona a hiya lani a hi ku hi le valungwini na sport Nelspruit ya xava ti-supplies at wholesale. Se ni vona van'wanyana va ka va nga fani na hina lava va nga na mabindzu lamakulu. Se swi navetisa, hi swi vona ku okay, loko ho tirha hi ku tiyimisela hi ya mahlweni swinene, hi gingiriteka, hi nga fika laya. Se hi vona lava va vona va tsakisa. Naswona bava a tirha Giyani, a ri parliament ya Gazankulu. Ene loko hi ya le Giyani, Giyani a ku hluvukile ku hundza mala. Hina hi ri va le bush. Ene loko se hi ya le hi vona swikontiri, hi vona van'wamabindzu va le Giyani. Va masingita hi minkarhi yeleyo na hinkwaswo leswiya na hina hi twa hi navela ku ri na van'wamabindzu va ku fana na va Risava hala Nkonko. Ntsundzuka na va John Hlungwana hala Giyani va ri na matibazi. So va ri kona vamabindzu lava a swi va fambela kahle, na hina hi navela ku siku rin'wanyana hi nga kula hi fika hi fana na vona.
Enkom. So for those that don't know what he's talking about, please read his book. He's mentioned the foundation once again coming from his parents as entrepreneurs, as business people, but also his context in Bushbuck Ridge and also his dual context in Gazankulu, in Giyani in particular. And he mentioned a few choice names of early stage entrepreneurs in the Gazankulu area that inspired him. He also mentioned infrastructure, which we'll come back to when we're talking about his role at GE, road infrastructure. And it's really important for us to think about how infrastructure, systems, institutions play a role in shaping our leadership in this country and on this continent. Thank you so much for honoring our mother tongue, so to speak. Many of us, when we think about leadership experiences, we learn from other people's successes. And you mentioned a lot of people that you learned from in the book. And I will come back to that. But in my time as a corporate person, in my time in the business community, and in my time as an academic, I have learned most from adversity. You make yourself vulnerable by sharing a painful part of your family history, the death of your sister. And I say it respectfully because I think it's your story. You can own it authentically. I wonder if you can help me just by giving us a sense of how that story, how that part of your life and your family history has shaped your leadership journey.
Yeah, so losing a younger sister who was 8 years old when I was turning 12. And actually it was a month before I turned 12. And doing what is today grade 9. Because I went to high school quite early and I was at a boarding school, was really one of the most painful experiences of my life. Even today, I remember it like it was yesterday, especially given the tragic nature of her passing, where she was bent down to death in our family shop. But I think when I look at where I am today, I'm quite resilient. And I think some of the foundations came from there because my dad still insisted after the loss that the Monday after the burial on Saturday, we still went to write our external examination of the then Standard 7. And we passed with flying colors because we had to almost like bounce back from such a setback. And I've since learned that whenever you experience a setback, your recovery has got to be 2 times so that you offset the blip, if you like, and that has become a little bit of my ethos. But the second part is that, of course, these were the people who did it, who have since been convicted and served time, were not friends to the family, of course. So they were rivals, business rivals, political rivals. And I think one of the things is I write about it in my book, to say, even in your career as you want to grow, you need to realize that not everyone is supportive of your mission. Not everyone is supportive of what you're trying to grow. And it's quite competitive because as you go up, it becomes a pyramid, fewer roles and more people wanting those roles, whether they are ready or not. And not everyone plays clean. And therefore you need to be, I write and say, beware of the sharks. Because as much as we really would love people to be playing clean and be supporting us, there are people who are detractors. And you need to know who are your supporters and who are your detractors. So it's just made me more streetwise. But more importantly, like my dad said during that time to a 12-year-old, is that, look, this has been done by our enemies. But the worst you can do is to now go downwards because of this, because then you're making them even happier. So never make your enemies happy. And as we're speaking in my home language, the exact quote is, "Ongatsakisi valala." So just continue on your mission. This is a setback, learn from it, understand it for what it is, but be strong. And I think in business, we are called time and time again in crisis to be resilient. We are called time and time again to be competitive. We are called time and time again to keep going, even in tough circumstances we face.
So I hear about the enemy out there. When I listen to the early stories of Nyimpini after university, having made an important choice to go to P&G instead of Unilever, it sounds like to me we have to also worry about the enemy within. Because it sounds like you were in a self-destructive mode. You almost kind of killed your career before it began. And this is a story that I'm sure many young people can resonate with. Just share with us what was going on with you at the time. Try and tell it as if it's live, as opposed to through the rearview mirror.
So look, here I am. I've never been to Johannesburg, never really lived in Johannesburg, right? So I finished my matric.
I must tell you, I grew up in Johannesburg all my life.
Exactly. So the
listening to this farm boy
so the
getting lost,
me.
going to work for 3 hours is very confusing to me. But I have empathy for you.
Indeed. So straight from boarding school in Guyana, flew to, via OR Tambo of course, but flew to Cape Town, 4 years there, and at the age of 19, you finish in December with your graduation, then January you come to Johannesburg for the first time and you start working. And then my uncle takes me to work, Kempton Park for Procter & Gamble. Now, I'm a graduate trainee in sales. What I didn't realize is that on day one, I'll be given a company car, quite a luxurious company car. I remember it very well. And
yes, the guys and elders love those cars.
Yeah, indeed. I mean, it's a VW. But I do not have expenses because my mom insisted that I stay with her brother, my uncle in Pimville. I don't need to pay for the car. It's a company car with a petrol card. I was fortunate enough because of my family background that I didn't have the loan to pay. So my varsity is paid up. And I'm like earning, and I do disclose, I think it was 4.6. 4,600, into my pocket. And
I must just say, my first, just to show how privileged you were, but then again, there's a time difference. My first job was in 1990, and my first salary was 980 Rand.
Yeah, so mine was 1996, right? And 4,600 with a car, no accommodation.
Per month, by the way, guys, per month. Yeah.
So I lost it, because Joburg is nice, right? I didn't have to study for exams anymore. I feel like I've got this emancipation. I don't have to be in a lecture room. I don't have to do this and that. Of course, I had to do something called work, which means I have to go and see my customers and do all of that. But for me, it almost like became as a by the way. Every day was a party, right? And with a car at my age, most of my friends didn't have cars because, your first year working, you can't afford, maybe you wait until second or third year. Yeah. So I'm the transporter, whereas I've got petrol card, so they're buying me all the drinks, we're going around. And it was a life of a party, really having a good time. And I think by the end of the year, I had lost pace with my performance trackers, my performance measures, and the people that I started working with were ahead of me. And I think at the end of the first 12 months, they were promoted to the next rotation, and I wasn't. And that was the wake-up call. And when I looked at my KPIs at the time, they were really terrible. And I was given 6 months to shape up or shape out, which is typical graduate scheme and program and typical Procter & Gamble. And that was the wake-up call. But I was doing terribly in my first year. I could have lost my job. And I didn't like what I was doing. I had a mental attitude that says that I'm overqualified to be a sales rep. And I think the mind is a powerful thing because in hindsight, some of the successes I had later in my career came from the fact that I was a sales rep. I had understood what happens in the field. I had understood, especially what is very important today, customer obsession. And I had understood already, if you think about it, which many people didn't have a privilege to run a P&L from the age of 19. Because as a sales rep, my area had its own P&L.
So you obviously hadn't been listening to...
But I wasn't
to Bob Marley at that stage, because he would have told you need to emancipate yourself from mental slavery,
Absolutely.
Right? And so when we're talking then about the enemy within is about talking to young Nyimpinis and others and say you really need to be very careful about the music you are listening to and the stories you are telling yourself about what is work. And who you are, because work and identity really can mess you up if you don't align those. So what message do you take from that going forward? I mean, what advice would you give to your 15-year-old son when he says, Dad, when I finish university, how do I get into the right mindset?
So one of those advice points I would give is because it's precisely why I wrote the book, Maurice, because I didn't have the guidance as a first-generation corporate worker. My mom was a teacher, my dad a politician. No one worked in corporate to then give a bit of a guidance and sit me down as I start in my career to say, these are the do's and don'ts. And I see that gap in many young people that I've worked with because they are first generation in their families. And I say, I wrote this book and I joke to be an uncle in your pocket because you cannot have those dinner conversations with your grandparents, your uncle, your parents about navigating the corporate life. So surround yourself with people that can guide you. So one chapter in my book is called Personal Board of Directors.
The
And
final
that is-
chapter.
Yes, and that is a broad set of stakeholders, including family, whether you are a believer, spiritual, and mentor and coach. Just have that so that you can have those authentic conversations. Because I think if I had that, someone would have actually seen that I'm derailing. I lived with my uncle, but he wasn't in this situation, so he didn't even see that actually I was lost, because he didn't know what to pick up from that. So really surround yourself with that. And of course, and then the second big point in advice is that in your journey, in your career journey, you're not always going to do the jobs that at the point you think make sense to what you're trying to do or you're enjoying the most. But it is actually a necessary part of your learning journey. We all want to sit in a big office. We all want to be in an air conditioning, but actually go through the journey, and it helps to work bottom up. And later, and I talk about this in my book, I had a privilege of owning 6 Nando's as a franchisee. And part of me, before I even qualified to own Nando's, I had to work in the kitchen, flipping burgers, cooking chicken. I had to work as a cashier. I had to do all of that. And that enabled me to better manage the Nando's, because shrinkage and fraud and inefficiencies happens through that ecosystem. So there's no job that is not good enough for you. And I think mentally you have you have a developmental mind to say, do what is necessary to grow through the system and understand the detail.
So when you listen to speeches and comments from great CEOs like Steve Jobs, this idea of fun and doing what you love is important. And I know at a business school perspective, I'm supposed to kind of understand all of that. And at a level, I kind of think I know what they're saying, but I can't connect fully with that. So I want to stay a little bit in this place of fun, particularly talking to the archetype of the early career person. How do you think they should think about fun and work? Not that I haven't enjoyed my work, but fun has not been at the forefront of any of the roles that I have done. For me, there's been something else. I don't want to reveal it, but I'm just interested for you to think about work and this word fun. How do we kind of make them kind of live side by side?
Yeah. So the way I think about it is and I say to people, look, we work, I don't know, at worst minimal, say 8-hour day, but like many people, 12, 14-hour days, right? And then if you add how long you sleep, and then the time you spend with friends and family, most of the time we actually spend at work, if you really break it down. And therefore, if for somehow you do not generate fulfillment and enjoyment doing it, then you're going to be a miserable person. Because that's just really, if you're in corporate or you are working, you're earning a salary on the 25th or 30th of every month, that's what you spend most of your time doing. So that's what I think about it. But I'm also pragmatic enough to say that you're not going to love what you do all the time and all the jobs that you have. But find something in the job that you're doing that you actually enjoy. And it can be small things that just keeps you stimulated. And for me, even when I was a sales rep, even if it is the trips in between customers because of the music, you're talking about Bob Marley, that you play in the car, or when you're doing the administration at the end of the week because you're now doing the tally of how much you've sold, or it is to see some of your favorite customers. You may not necessarily enjoy, like I didn't, to pick up the damages. And at the time I sold bleach, and you pick up the damages and then the bottles leak onto your pens and then destroy your pens and stuff like that. You might not enjoy all of that, but then there has to be something that you look forward to. And this is what we call a spike. So it may not be everything, but there has to be some spike within the role that you look for, that you enjoy, so that it is not miserable. So for me, that is the connection. And ultimately, what needs to inspire you is the journey that you're on. So what is the bigger picture? And that is the one that make it a lot more holistic. And then lastly, is generate fun from the team that you work with. And we don't work in isolation. We work in a team environment. And certainly, I used to look forward to the Friday sales meetings because, as sales rep, we scattered all over during the week. But on Fridays, we get together, and then after that, we'll have a little bit of a social. And it was still competitive because we look in the tallies who sold what, but then after that, we have a bit of a drink. So for me, even though I would feel miserable in certain parts during the work, but during end of the week, then I look forward to that, So I think just stimulate yourself and have a little bit of a light-hearted moment, so that it's not you're not daunted when you have to wake up in the morning to go and do what you do.
So you spend a lot of your time in FMCG. So we can maybe spend a little bit of time there before we go into the tech and later into your most recent part of your career. And of course, there's also a sojourn into consulting. When you take a step back and you think about early career people and how young people today think about work, so you talk about 25 years in the place of work. I'm like 32 years. I think about that and said, my goodness, I need to retire.
Are you older than me?
Slightly.
No, you're not.
Slightly. So you're right about health and wellness. I feel like I'm not as healthy as you are.
No, come on. No.
So when you think about FMCG, and what are some of the key lessons that young people in other industries they can learn about from people like you who spend a significant amount of time both locally in our region on the continent as well as internationally operating in the FMCG market?
Yeah, so there's a couple of things. I think the first one for me is I think FMCG is the cutthroat of competitiveness. In fact, none of the other industries I've worked in since are as competitive, right? Because picture this. You walk into a retailer like a Pick and Pay or a ShopRite, and you open the fridge where there's butter and margarine, and you can find 10 different brands, 10 different sizes in there. And that's not the only things that retailer is selling. They're selling many other things. And all of these manufacturers who are selling through that retailer are competing for your wallet. And if you're lucky enough that they go to the category like a margarine or soft drinks, then there's 10 other brands that they have to choose from. And yourself as a manufacturer, as a marketer, you're actually competing for that spend, that wallet, in a retailer that also wants to make money but have got such low margin. So for me, I don't think there's a more competitive industry than FMCG. You are on the edge all the time. So if you really want to understand anything about influencing the customer choice indirectly, because you can't even talk to the customer directly, you reach them through a retailer, FMCG is the one. So that's number one. And the second thing is the power of playing with your what you call your marketing mix, particularly your pricing and your visibility. So today we talk about driving visibility in the digital space. We talk about e-commerce, but really, how do you use sensory and pricing and behavioral science to win at the moment of choice? I see a lot of industries today adopting that thinking. Your healthcare industries, your financial services industries, your telecoms, around that behavioral science. And I think it comes from that winning at the moment of choice for FMCG. And then the third one, I think, is the power of distribution. And many people talk about, the Coke saying that within arm's length. How do you really penetrate the market to the deepest and make it as convenient as possible to the customer? Today we talk about design thinking and customer obsession, but FMCG have been doing that. If you look at the old days of SAB with beer, you would have beer available everywhere, even more than food. Sometimes which is controversial in its own way, but if you really think about logistics planning, which today the likes of e-commerce players like your Take a Lot and whatever are thinking through, I think that those lessons comes from FMCG and the efficiencies. And using that as a platform, you can create a very competitive e-commerce players.
Yeah, so those of you that are watching us now, we are all very aspirational in this country. We've got lots of talented people, but somehow the most basic thing of keeping the lights on eludes us. So please stay with us in our moment of shame, and this too shall pass.
Yeah.
We are busy rebooting, and I'm sure GE is doing all that it can to help us to keep our lights on. So let me invite you all to keep the questions coming. And whilst we're talking about keeping the questions coming, Nyimpini, let me refer to Wesley Rue, who's asking, because this was one of my questions that I was obsessing about, was being a CEO always a goal for you? Was your focus then fixed to achieve this?
Yes, that is true. So I was lucky that Procter & Gamble, where I started my career, it's very focused on career management and career advancement. And they had a pure promote from within policy. So they only hired graduates and then they go through the system. So even today, the CEO of Procter & Gamble joined as a graduate, and all the previous CEOs did the same. And therefore, career management and career conversation was very, very important. And therefore, you asked about what are your big hopes and what is your career dream. And it's okay if it changes, but you have that conversation. But more importantly, you also have a challenge and build conversation to say, do you know what it takes? Do you have what it takes? So that it's one thing to have the dream and the ambition. It's another to be willing to put in the work and to have the know-how or the talent to get there. And more importantly, the attitude, because intelligence or performance is not enough. You need more. And I say this in my book.
So I know this is about your story in your book, but I can't resist sharing a personal story. I think it was 1995, just before you started working.
Yeah.
And I was working for a gentleman who was in a general management position, and I was a young legal advisor. And he leaves my file open, obviously facing his side of the desk, and to grab a cup of coffee. So I read what was being said about me upside down. So I've always learned to read upside down, so you don't leave stuff.
Yeah.
And what had happened was I had gone for a career interview with our head of HR in the company, and they'd asked me, so in the next 5 years, what would you like to do? I said, well, in the next 5 years, I would like to be the general manager, to have my boss's job.
Yeah.
You know? And so the HR wrote that this is what Morris had said, and the conclusion was delusions of grandeur. So the conclusion for me was interesting. Clearly, I'm not going to achieve much in this space.
Yeah.
And the story ends well because actually not only was I a general manager, but actually in 6 years I was CEO.
Yeah.
And the very same general manager then was reporting to me. So that was where the funny thing came through. But now I'm talking about your book now, Taking Charge. So how did you know to take charge at each inflection point, whether it's at P&G when you chose to leave, whether it's at Diageo, whether it's at Vodacom, just to name a few points that you raised in the book? How did you know that actually at this point, given my goal that Wesley spoke about, I'm not on the right path? So as great as these companies are, I'm not on the right path.
Yeah. So, Maurice, what you've just shared is so important because I think, unfortunately, intentional or not, there will be situations where people will discourage you on your path, and yet that is just their view of things. And I think quite often we take that to heart. And I'm not saying don't listen to feedback if it doesn't suit your narrative, but not, you know yourself best. And sometimes when you part with an employer, you could do so much better elsewhere because the environment perhaps was no longer suitable for your growth, rather than to say that you cannot grow. So this point about delusion, I've had a few of those conversations, but you need to always try and understand where people are coming from. And we've all had situations where someone has left one employer and they were considered not great talent, and they went on to become a huge success elsewhere. And we need to think about that. So I think part of taking charge is, and I said, we need to own our careers. And in doing so, there's an element of being stubborn and relentless in pursuit, because you're going to find so many challenges and the naysayers. And it's the same as entrepreneurship, where successful entrepreneurs we see today have had spectacular failures, and bankers walking away, and then they went on to still build huge businesses. So for me, there's a resilience and being a bit of a forceful nature. Now, coming back, I think what I learned is that once you've decided that this is what I want to do in 5 years or in 10 years, then you need to know what it will take, what you need to know to get there. You need to have a plan. It's not enough to then say, in 5 years, I want to be marketing manager if you are an assistant brand manager today, without understanding the steps. And the way I've done that for me is I've always approached people who are doing the job that I would like to do, whether directly or indirectly. So directly it could be my boss, but indirectly it could be someone else I know outside of the industry or the company who is a CEO. And I said, tell me your story. How did you get there? And more importantly, I focused on what competencies do I need to have to get there. You know, so I remember very well a conversation I had back in 2004 with the then CEO of Diageo in South Africa. And I said, I think in 10 years' time, I would love to do your job. This was 2004. And mind you, I got my first CEO role in 2013. So it wasn't so bad. I got there in 9 years, then 10. But I said, in 10 years' time, I would love to do your job. You know me, you've interacted with me. At the time, I was marketing manager for the biggest portfolio in the brand. I said, like, what do you think I'm lacking? What do you think I still need to learn? What does it take to do your job? What are the core skills that I needed? And I got surprised, because he then went to his computer and printed his job profile. And I said, I bet you haven't seen this. This is the role profile of a CEO, and these are the things that I needed. So based on what I know of you, you've got 1, 2, 3. You need 1, 2, 3, 4. And this is how I think you could build it. And that almost became a template for me, because it came from the so-called horse's mouth. And at some point, I then realized that actually, based on the template, Diageo was no longer delivering in South Africa on that. And that's when I started to look for other opportunities. That's how I ended up at Nando's and being a franchisee. Because at the point, I said, one of the things that he had told me, because I was in the context of a multinational, is that I would need international experience. And at the time, which was back in 2006, I had worked 10 years in South Africa. And I said, I'm enough. I've done 10 years here. It's time for me to move to another country and get international experience. There was no immediate international experience available. So I said, okay, let me go and get other experiences. But these other experiences I can't get in this environment. The other experience I said I should get is experience of running a business. And that's when, by chance, when I met Robbie, and I got an opportunity to be a master franchisee at Nando's, I said, here I get 6 restaurants to run. I borrow money. I've got 98 people I'm employing. I select sites. I manage the finances, and da-da-da-da. This is a real business. I'm already having a trial run of being a CEO. So that's why I decided to leave Diageo, because I said I can continue doing what I'm doing, but it's not adding value to my destiny. And true to form, so 2 years after I'm out with Nando's, the very same CEO then called me back and say, okay, I know you left because you wanted to go overseas and there was no opportunity. There's an opportunity right now of a great job in London. Would you still be interested? I had to think, because now I was on another path. Then a week later, I said, yes, I'm interested. And I flew to London for an interview. And that's how I then moved to the UK. But it was always, this milestone, always driven by how does it add value to where I'm going. And going to Uganda was exactly the same thing, because it wasn't fancy going to Uganda for all what it has. But for me, because I was an ambitious CEO, and that was my first opportunity of proving myself as a CEO. Uganda was great because it was a full end-to-end business. We had 2 operations, plants, so I could learn supply chain. It was not an import market, small enough for me to manage end-to-end, but also to have the freedom to run it, because it wasn't in the spotlight like a Kenya, Nigeria, and South Africa would. It was a little bit on the side, so you can play around a little bit with it. But more importantly, it was a business in trouble that needed a turnaround. So much as lifestyle-wise, it wasn't ideal at the time, but I enjoyed it a lot later. It was a perfect first CEO role, and I knew that if I'm successful in turning it around, my career trajectory will actually be on an accelerated path. And that is why I'm saying that it is, I guess, comfortable and exciting to take the big jobs. But sometimes it is in those not so fancy jobs, not so popular jobs, that you can create your own fame, because that story is fully yours. And we had this thing even at Diageo to say, actually working for a brand like Johnny Walker, the same as working for brand Coke, how much of what has been done is really you.
Yeah.
You know, because you get a blueprint, you get a code. These are the brands that are non-negotiable. You have to do this. But for me, working in soft drinks within Diageo, going to work in Uganda, which is not a key market, I was able to have the support of a multinational, have the best practice within a multinational, but give it my own local twist.
So I know people will tell you this page is transformative, that page is transformative. For me, the best page is on a top paragraph on page 112.
Not that I remember what's there.
Let me ask you to open page 112, top paragraph. You will understand.
Yeah, you made me curious.
And as you are reading that,
I love it. Should I read it?
I'm going to ask you a question from Kishan Vandayar, and as you answer, you can read why I said page 112. You say, so Kishan says, what advice would you have for a 26-year-old MBA candidate in logistics? Clearly you're in the wrong school, because we don't offer an MBA in logistics, Kishan. Come to us. We'll give you a better MBA. Growth is slow and I'm ready for a new challenge. Like I said, come to GIBS. Should I leave the industry or stick it out? So now practice what you learned at that amazing institution that you mentioned on page 1.
Let me just read this. I quote, I researched the right institution for executive coaching and spoke with those who had taken such courses for testimonials. Ultimately, I decided to do a 6-week course through the Gordon's Institute of Business Science, GIBS. And of course, the dean here would be very happy about that. So look, this is a great school, absolutely. And since that experience, I've had so many friends in the school, and I've been back so many times. So you guys are doing a great job indeed.
No, thank you. So then using some of those coaching skills, Kishan is asking for coaching advice.
About the logistics.
About should he stay in his industry or stick it out, given the challenges in his industry. So I don't know whether he's in the logistics industry or whether he's just studying logistics.
I mean, look, I can only speculate. So in coaching, one of the big principles for it is that we have a conversation, and it's a facilitated conversation, and Kishan will then find the solution in me prompting and asking the right questions, right? So I don't know enough about this situation to say, but I think I understand where it might be coming from. One is logistics currently, it's under a lot of pressure, mostly because of the Russia-Ukraine situation where things have slowed down. And of course, if you look in South Africa, especially if you're an import-export, there's even more pressure around the ports. I think there's something like 3 billion rands worth of goods or money we're leaving on the table because of some of the ports. And therefore, a combination of that and the inflation can create a sense of frustration and say, what industry am I in? Where is it going? I would say that in any industry, you do have some short to medium term blip. And in my mind, I don't think this is here to stay. Of course, the war has to be solved at some point. The president has spoken about the investment and the PPPs coming into the ports. So I think look at the bigger picture rather than the short term. The logistics has got a great future because we all have to build ecosystem for the likes of e-commerce, for example. If you look at NASPA's results, they talk about how well they've done with Take a Lot. And on the back of that, Amazon says that they're launching in this country. All of that requires warehouses, requires trucking, requires cargo movement. So I can't see how logistics going forward would not be lucrative. But in my mind also, because I love diversity, I can see logistics skills because they're all about efficiencies as well, transferable to other industries of financial engineering, financial leverage. So I think it's a great place to be. If he's no longer enjoying it and for his own career objectives and where he wants to go, he thinks it's better off elsewhere, then of course he needs to move, but not because logistics is not lucrative. Those skills are needed everywhere.
Great coaching. I think Ellie would be very happy to see her graduates giving such great advice. So you spoke about people that are employed, making choices, managing their careers.
Yeah.
Jessica Conradi is much more interested about people that are excluded, people in Raleigh and other places. She says, I would like to know your opinion. How can we navigate the current economic climate? Globally, there are shortages of the most essential goods. What do you propose we do to solve current problems like power, energy shortages, and how can we help the youth secure income after finishing high school?
Yeah, so that's a good question. And lately I've had lots of engagement with unemployed youth, in particular unemployed graduates. I've had a lot of speaking events in that. And for me, I've shared 3 lines of thoughts in terms of advice. One is this is the time to diversify your skill base. Do not be married to what you studied, because what you studied is the canvas. You learn at university how to think, how to apply your mind, how to apply critical thinking. But then I think the world going forward is looking for generalists and therefore learn other things. We've got engineers who are working in marketing. We've got actuarial scientists who are CFOs. So it's no longer that linear, and therefore diversify, and there's a lot of free online courses and stuff that people can use to improve their skills in the meantime. So that's number one. Secondly, look beyond corporate. There's a lot of incentives available for people to start jobs, and in reality, there's still shortages of skills, particularly from SMEs in certain areas. Take renewable energy, for instance. The industry in renewable energy today is asking government to reduce the localization requirements, which was 30% to 20% to 10%, because you just cannot find contractors in that space. So how do you set yourself up in areas of skill demand and use the incentives that are available to go there would be the second thing. And then the third one, and lastly, is that you will meet a lot of challenges and failures at this time, not because you are a failure, but because the economy is tough. You'll get more rejection than you bargained for. Do not let that knock your self-confidence. Take it in context, because what I hear from a lot of my HR director friends is that young people, even when they get an opportunity and they go to interviews, they show up beaten up, and they don't do justice to their skills and marketing themselves, because their confidence has already been knocked. So find a way to bounce back, have resilience, and deal with failure. Take care of your mental health.
So towards the end of your book, as we're about to round off our conversation,
Sure.
um, you talk about investing in yourself, investing in others. Just share some considerations in that regard.
Yeah, so for me, one of the things that made me grow in my career is because I've made myself, I've taken myself out of work, right? I've made myself, what's the word?
Redundant.
Redundant, yes, yes. You see, I need to talk to a professor for this big word. I've really made myself redundant because I've always believed that I need to grow my direct reports to be able to do my job so that I can free myself to do something bigger, right, on to guide them and to learn more. Because if they're able to do my job and they're delivering, my KPIs are still delivered, but I'm actually freeing myself to work at an even higher level. But more importantly, I am saying to the organization that's hiring me, that's employing me at the time, that one of my direct report is ready now to do my job. Then they're left with a problem to say, what do they do with me? And if I'm good enough, then they're left with no choice but to promote me, right? So while other people look at giving responsibility to their direct reports and allowing them to do their jobs as a threat to say that then I will be fired, or and then withhold information and all of that. For me, that has been empowering because it says I'm very good at developing talent, but more importantly, give me other opportunities because my people are ready. And that's what I learned from P&G. So that's kind of number one. But the second thing is that I believe, Maurice, that what really shows how good you are is when the work that you've done is sustained. And there's no point of me doing a job for 3-4 years and then I move on and everything crumbles. Right? Legacy, it's about systems and things that you've set up to continue long after you've been there. And therefore, if you've got people that you can hand over the baton to, and then they take it to another level, then you have a legacy that you've left. Therefore, that continuity is very, very important. And that has been my approach. And then lastly, the approach in terms of growing others, and hence I coach even today, is that by growing the talent, you actually grow in yourself. You're learning. So by interacting, a lot of times when I coach or mentor, people say, well, why do you spend time doing this? It's because I'm also learning. There are things I don't know that I can learn from younger people. So actually, by investing time to grow others, you're giving yourself a gift of growth.
Yeah, lovely. So I'm going to shoot 3 questions. One, like quick comments. I hope this is the same Kabinde who studied here. Temba Kabinde says, how did you make your career as aligned with your sense of purpose, or your purpose was your purpose not much import than your career? So in a sense, I'm kind of paraphrasing his question.
Sure.
Was your career a function of your purpose, or was your purpose irrelevant?
No. My purpose is very relevant. But I found myself along the journey. So because my purpose, I always say, is to ignite self-confidence in others, right? I find that whenever I interact with people, I leave them feeling more positive, more hopeful, and believing more in themselves than they did before. And I said, I want to spread the word. I want to spread that self-confidence. I want to spread the growth in others. And that's actually why I wrote the book, because the book is a developmental book. Yeah. I'm saying that you can. And therefore, as a leader, because since the age of 21, I've been a line manager, and I'm an executive coach, and I sit on boards, I'm always sparking growth in others. And that's my purpose.
So somebody who needs a spark in his life is Ezekiel Mfati. So how can you move on when you're feeling stuck?
Firstly, understand what makes you feel stuck. I'm a marketer. I always tell you that whenever you come through a problem, firstly, have insights to say, why am I here? What is happening right now? You really need to understand yourself. And I think this thing about working to your strengths and really understand, who am I and who am I at my best? It's very important. One of the things that can help you move on is leveraging your strengths. But many people don't actually know what our strength is. One boss of mine told me that, Nyimpini, you don't have to be good in everything, but you've got to be exceptional in something. So what's your signature?
That's what Tiger Woods understood very early on. He's not a great husband, but he's a great golfer. And then Headley John Yankee says, what advice would you have for late bloomers that aspire to reach the top of the mountain?
It's never too late. I mean, I think that's the thing, right? Number one, your attitude has got to be, it's never too late. I heard a story about Colonel Sanders starting KFC at the age of 69, right? And in fact, many entrepreneurs start at that time. So it's really never too late. There's always a second chance. Even if it has been because of failure, you can still bounce back and learn from it. So for me, it's like find your passion, find yourself. Yeah, the thing that you love doing, it can never be too late for, you know.
So towards the end of your book, you talk about, let's come back to that question actually, because I want to just sneak in one other question before I conclude with that one.
Yeah.
You mentioned earlier your personal board of advisors, which I find an intriguing concept, and also how you kind of play homage to all the people that have had a positive impact in your career. Why is it so important to have this personal board of directors, board of advisors?
Because I don't believe in reinventing the wheel. The thing is that whatever you're trying to do, someone else has done an aspect of it. And therefore, I'm a great finisher. If I was a footballer, I would be a striker. In the sense that, you know, I like to have the basis and talk to the basis. Even when I wrote the book, I spoke to authors of successful books before I wrote mine. And then I want to believe I made mine better because I don't take everything verbatim, but I add to that. So for me, I don't like to waste time. I'm big on efficiency. And people are generous in sharing. So you go there and ask them, how did you do this? And then you pick up from different people and then you create your own story. So for me, that's really important. But also to have, more importantly, especially as senior leaders, people are not always honest with us. You know, I know, and we all have heard the story, many of us in CEO position, people tell us what they think we like to hear. We are being managed all the time. Yeah. So you need to give yourself a gift by having people that will be authentic with you and tell you even when you've messed up. And you need to hear that. So for me, that's very important in terms of growing yourself, because all of us are work in progress.
So in the 140s, and because I can't keep too many numbers at my advanced age, I only remembered 112, but in the 140s you speak about the best advice you were given. Do you remember what that is? The best advice you were given?
I don't know if it was the best advice, but I do remember an advice that a good friend, Tebuko Maha, gave me. Is that the one I'm talking about?
Tell us.
That says that, Nyimpini, it's a jungle out there. You eat or you get eaten. Make sure you make the first move.
That's not the one I'm talking about. So that's not the one I'm talking about.
This book has been 2 years in making.
So the one I'm talking about has to do with operating above your level of competence.
Oh, yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
Talk to us about
absolutely. If you aspire to a certain role, you have to demonstrate today that you have capacity to do that. And therefore, you need to do the job that you would like to do tomorrow, today. Because otherwise, how else does the people making the decision to promote you know that you are ready? You know? So I talk about we're expansive, we can do more. What we do in our day jobs and what is prescribed is the minimum expected. But you have to deliver beyond that and punch above your weight. And if it means that there's a bit of a imposter syndrome, let it be. But you always need to show intent and capacity to do more.
So we're going to end with some words from Mandisa and then some words from me. So Mandisa Nkwanyana says, the lessons in this book are both reflective for us who are already leading teams and visionary for the younger generation entering the world of work. And she says, thank you, Mr. Mabunda. And for me, I'd like to give you a gift and suggest you go and listen to any music by Miles Davis, because what you learned from Miles Davis, the amazing jazz aficionado, is that the greatest leaders, the greatest performers lead with provocative competence.
Yeah.
What that means is constantly challenging yourself, constantly disrupting yourself, and constantly being generous that it can be done.
Yeah.
And so take charge, everybody, and let's help Mr. Mabunda continue to enjoy success with his book, because through his book, he can be the uncle in your pocket as you manage your career. Thank you.